I've injected 42 different peptides into my own body over the last 17 years. And I learned how to do it by training under Putin's personal anti-aging doctor protocol, Dr. Kevinson. And out of all 42, 6 are my favorite. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through my top 6 peptides and the benefit and side effect of these peptides. My name is Noah Laith, and I'm the founder of the Longevity Clinic, and I've been obsessed with peptides ever since 2009, because peptides help me recover from many injuries, including a herniated disc in almost 3 months. But more on that later. So now let's dive right into it. So what are peptides? Peptides are the building blocks of protein. They are made up of something called amino acids, and they help in repairing damaged tissue, regulating hormones, fighting inflammation, and telling your immune system when to act and when not to act, along with many other things. You see, you have more than 230,000 peptides in your body. But these days, a lot of these peptides are heavily unregulated, which raises a lot of concern. Which is why, after testing almost all the peptides in the market, I want to walk you through the ones that are actually worth the risk. Now, starting with peptide number 6. This peptide was the start of my 17-year obsession with peptides because it literally healed my spinal injury. Let me take you back to how it got discovered. Back in the 90s, scientists in Croatia found something interesting. They were trying to figure out why your stomach lining can take constant damage from acid and still heal itself over and over without ever scaring. So they isolated the specific protein responsible for that repair and studied its structure. And during their research, they found a tiny piece of this protein. This little piece is what actually helped the stomach healing and fixing body tissues. And this piece was called BPC-157, or Body Protection Compound 157. And over the years, scientists have found that this peptide doesn't just work in the stomach. Some animal studies have shown that it helps injuries to tendons, ligaments, muscle tissues, and the gut lining heal faster. And this is because of how this peptide works. Let me explain. When BPC-157 enters your body, it stimulates something called angiogenesis, which is basically the growth of new blood vessels into damaged tissue. And more blood vessels means more oxygen and more nutrients reaching an injury, which is exactly what speed up the repair. And that's why today BPC-157 is known as the go-to peptide for injury that just won't go away. Also, one of the most underrated effects of BPC is the effect on the brain. Yes, the brain. BPC-157 protects brain tissue after injury partly by interacting with the same dopamine and serotonin receptors and systems that antidepressants target. So BPC is actually an amazing antidepressant, but doesn't mean that everyone should take this. I mean, if you have an active tumor or have a history of cancer in your family, you should not take these peptides without medical supervision because it works by helping blood vessels grow, and that could help the wrong things grow too. It's also worth knowing that BPC-157 still isn't FDA approved, which means quality varies enormously from supplier to supplier. Some products sold online are labeled research use only and were never manufactured to a standard safe for human injection. And that's why you should only buy BPC-157 from GMP certified pharmaceutical grade labs. Now let's move on to peptide number 5. Over the years, the combination of this peptide with BPC-157 has been famously referred to as the Wolverine stack. And this is because, just like the Marvel superhero Wolverine, this stack can help in faster recovery. And that's why it's popular amongst athletes. If you haven't guessed yet, the peptides I'm talking about is called TB500 or thymosin beta 4. Without using BPC-157 and TB500 together, even I wouldn't have been able to recover so fast from my injury. And this is because TB500 comes from a protein your body already makes called thymosin beta 4. And researchers found back in the 80s while studying how the immune system responds to injury. And they found that every time a tissue got damaged, this protein showed up mysteriously. But it wasn't healing the tissue directly. It was doing something else entirely. This peptide was helping repair cells move to where the damage actually was. And this is important because when you get injured, your body doesn't already have repair cells sitting at the injury site. They actually have to travel there. And BPC-157 organized the healing process once those cells arrive by increasing blood flow and timing the right order of repair. But it doesn't get the cells there any faster. That's where TB500 fills the gap. It helps repair cells move more efficiently to the injury so that the process that BPC 1000 organized can actually start much sooner. And that's how you heal much faster. And that's why the two work better together than either one alone. BPC 157 runs the repair, TB500s get the cells there faster. In my experience, side effects have been minimal, with occasionally mild fatigue at very higher doses. But TB500 is on the anti-doping prohibited list, which means if you're competing under any kind of drug testing, using this peptide might end your career, regardless of how well it works. And just like BPC 157, TB500 isn't FDA approved either, so you should only source it from a GMP certified pharmaceutical grade lab. Now let's move on to peptide number 4. The story of this peptide actually started in the middle of the HIV epidemic, when doctors were desperately searching for anything that could help thousands of patients. It was the early 90s, and Americans between the age of 25 and 44 were dying because of HIV. So scientists turned to a peptide that had actually been discovered decades earlier, back in 1966. This peptide was isolated from the thymus glands by a scientist named Alan Goldstein, and it was called thymosin alpha-1. And doctors found that when combined with standard HIV treatment, it did something extraordinary. It increased the number and function of CD4 cells, the exact immune cells HIV specifically target and destroys, while helping lower viral load at the same time. So this is because when thymosin alpha-1 enters your body, it does three things. First, it works like a master coach that trains young immune cells to grow into active disease-fighting soldiers. Second, it sharpens your body's internal radar so it can quickly spot and destroy hidden viruses or infect cells on sight. And finally, third, it acts as a smart thermostat by boosting a weak immune response when you're sick, while calming down dangerous overactive inflammation. Today, thymosin alpha-1 has been approved as a prescription drug in over 35 countries for chronic viral infection, and it is used by HIV, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, and autistic patients. Yes, autistic patients benefit a lot from TA1. In fact, this peptide was investigated during the COVID-19 pandemic too, and that's why it is one of the most powerful peptides on this list for building a strong immune system, and that's why it helped prevent and kill early-stage cancer. Cancer is an immunity disease where cancer cells escape the immune system checkpoints, and thymosin alpha reinforce the immune system to kill the billion of cancer cells we produce daily. But if your immune system already works well, then it might not be of any use to you. So now let's go to the next peptide on my list. And this one is actually one of the most underrated peptides on this entire list, because almost no one outside the longevity space has ever heard of it. I first came across it while training in Russia under Putin's anti-ager doctor protocols. And once I understood what it actually did, I couldn't believe how little attention it gets compared to something like BPC 157. It all started in the 1980s, inside a Soviet research institute in St. Petersburg, when a scientist named Vladimir Kevinson was trying to find how to protect people from accelerated aging caused by extreme stress and radiation exposure. And he started studying the pineal gland, a small gland deep in your brain responsible for your sleep cycle. And from an extract of that gland, he isolated a tiny peptide just 4 amino acids long and called it epitalon. And he found that epitalon could activate an enzyme called telomerase. And this was a groundbreaking study because telomerase activation could potentially slow or reverse cellular aging. And this is because normally when your cell divides, the protective caps on the end of your chromosomes called telomeres get a little shorter. And once they get too short, that cell can't divide anymore. It becomes damaged or dies. And this is one of the core reasons your body ages at a cellular level. Telomerase is the enzyme that can rebuild those caps. And in lab studies on human cells, epitalon increased telomerase activity by as much as 30%. And in one study, it actually let cells divide well past the point they normally would have stopped. But this is good and bad at the same time, because telomerase shortening is also one of the ways our body protects us from uncontrolled cell division, which often leads to cancer. So chronically pushing telomerase is biologically double-edged. But on another note, these peptides also restore your natural melatonin rhythm. So as you age, the pineal gland's melatonin output declines, which is part of why sleep gets worse the older you get. And Kevinson's research found that epitalon could restore that rhythm in aging subjects. But unfortunately, most of the strongest research on epitalon comes out of that same Russian institute, and it hasn't been independently replicated in large Western trials yet. But that doesn't mean it doesn't work. It just means that the evidence base is thinner and less independently verified than something like BPC-157 or thymosin alpha-1. Now let's get to peptide number 2. And this one is actually the strangest discovery on this entire list, because for decades, scientists thought it was biological impossible for it to even exist. You see, for most of modern biology, scientists believe your mitochondria, the tiny structure inside every of your cells that produce energy, only had one job, which is to make ATP and nothing else. But in 2015, a researcher named Chang-Gan Lee at USC found something hiding inside mitochondrial DNA, and no one saw that coming. What they found was a tiny 16 amino acid peptides encoded in a part of the mitochondrial genome everyone assumed was just background noise, and he called it MOTS-C. And he found that MOTS-C doesn't just stay in the mitochondria. You see, when your body is metabolically stressed, things like sleep deprivation or restrictive dieting, MOTS-C actually travels into the nucleus of the cell and then starts directly influencing the expression of the genes responsible for managing how your body burns energy. It does this by turning on a vital internal control switch called AMPK that balances your metabolism and helps your cell process glucose more efficiently. And that's why researchers now call it an exercise mimetic. In mouse studies, MOTS-C improved insulin sensitivity, reduced obesity, and dramatically boosted physical endurance, even in old mice. In fact, in one study, all the mice treated with MOTS-C doubled their running capacity. But the thing that blew my mind away was a study published in Cell Reports, where researchers basically edited the genes of mice so that they became prone to type 1 diabetes. And then they treated them with MOTS-C, and they found that the treatment basically kept the mice from becoming diabetic. This happens because MOTS-C appeared to work by boosting the peacemaker cells that stops your body from attacking itself, while calming down the killer cells that normally destroy insulin. In fact, they saw a similar trend in humans where patients with diabetes 1 had naturally lower levels of these peptides. But just like everything else on this list, most of the human clinical trial data is still developing and not currently FDA approved for human use. So now let's move on to the final peptides on this list. We have discussed 5 peptides so far, and while they all had some amazing benefit, this last one might not just help regulate your mood, but it might also help improve your marriage. Let me explain. This peptide story starts back in the 80s. Some researchers in Arizona were trying to build a sunless tanning drug, a peptide called melatonin-2, that could stimulate melanin production without any UV exposure. And this was back when every girl wanted a dark tan line to show that they had just had an amazing time at the beach. But during early human trials, something completely unexpected kept happening. Male volunteers were getting spontaneous erections. In one trial, it happens in 9 out of 10 men. And that's when the researchers realized they had stumbled onto something far more valuable than a tan. So they isolated that specific piece of melatonin-2 responsible for that effect, refined it to remove most of the pigmentation side effects, and called it PT-141, also known by its generic name, bremelanotide. Now, this isn't Viagra in the form of a peptide, because instead of increasing blood flow to your genitals, PT-141 works by activating a receptor called melanocortin. And these receptors are directly tied to sexual desire in the brain. And that's why when you take these peptides, women or men, your libido increases, which explains why the men in the trial were getting erections. And that's also why these peptides can help you with low libido and intimacy issues in your marriage. The reason why this peptide is so revolutionary is that historically, options for female sexual dysfunction were massively limited. But PT-141 changed that entirely. And what's more is that it doesn't mess with your hormones. It works at a neurological level, not a physical one. And that's why after more than a decade of clinical trials involving over 1,200 women, the FDA approved PT-141 in 2019 under the brand name Vyleesi, specifically for hypoactive sexual desire disorder in peri- and postmenopausal women. But it's important to know that taking too much can cause nausea. and frequent use might temporarily raise your blood pressure, so please ensure you have a doctor's guidance. If you've made it this far in the video, then I want you to know that it took me 17 years of trial and error and researching and studying and traveling to places where people are obsessed with peptide research to understand what I just shared with you in a few minutes. I tested peptides that did nothing, sourced them from suppliers I shouldn't have trusted, and made mistakes that cost me a lot of time, a lot of energy and money, and that's why I built the Longevity Clinic. Every peptide protocol, every stem cell protocol starts with your own blood work, get adjusted based on how your body actually responds, and is sourced exclusively from GMP certified pharmaceutical grade labs. And even not every GMP lab is the same as another one. You always want to know who the owners are. How obsessed are they with their lab, with their work, with their results, with the pharma-grade products that they are creating, and never buy from a gray market vendor. If any of these 6 peptides caught your attention today, link is in the description. Click on it and get more information. And if you found this helpful, share it with someone who's already injecting something they can't fully explain. I'll see you in the next one.